Welcome to the Steelers Breakdown podcast featuring PennLive's Steelers beat reporter Nick Farabaugh. I would be remiss if we didn't start with the earth-shaking reverberations from that huge Philadelphia Eagles win in Super Bowl 59. Ever since we saw Kenny Pickett in victory formation taking a knee on the waning seconds of the Super Bowl, the parallels between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh have been all over social media. I mean, it's an open secret that the Steelers are trying to emulate the Eagles. I mean, we have Andy Weald. We plucked him out of Philadelphia. He's the number 2 with Omar Khan. We spent back-to-back first-round picks beefing up the O-line. And in this year's draft, I mean, the D-line is a top concern for the Steelers. Bigger and better on that D-line. And we saw the 4-man rush in Philadelphia just make mayhem of Patrick Mahomes. So, I mean, we want to pick Nick's brain for how close the Steelers could be to following in the footprints of Philadelphia to at least a few playoff postseason wins and then maybe to a Super Bowl down the road. But I do want to throw out some crazy voices talking about the parallels between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and even between Jalen Hurts and Justin Fields, because this whole Philadelphia domination of this AFC power has Pittsburgh juiced and maybe drinking too much juice based on some of these tweets that I've been seeing. Alex Kozora with Steelers Depot last night showed the Steelers have the basic vision to win the way the Eagles did. Build through the trenches, strong running game, QB mobility, rush 4, drop 7, but wanting it and actually getting it are night and day. Eagles coaching, evaluating talent are at levels that the Steelers are not. And Nick, I know you just wrote a story on some of the latest coaching changes, and I know you haven't been a big fan to who's leaving and who's coming in. So let's start there in terms of we're trying to pick talent like the Eagles, but are we developing talent with the coaches that we have to reach that level that Philadelphia has achieved?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Philly's model is just not easily replicable. I understand why the Steelers are doing it, but man, you got to be really good at evaluating talent. Howie Roseman with the Eagles is doing a great job. I mean, you look at the defensive line investment, and we've talked about defensive line from the Senior Bowl, how I think the Steelers are going to heavily focus there. But look at the Eagles' defensive line. You got stars like Milton Williams and Josh Sweat who were taken in the 4th round. The Steelers need more Alex Highsmiths and Nick Herbigs. That's what they need, because those guys were 3rd and 4th rounders and are huge hits. That's what the Steelers need to accelerate this rebuild, this retooling period that we're seeing. And so they need to hit not only on their first-round picks, they need some picks in that middle portion to really hit big, because they're really starting from the ground up. And so that's a big thing. Now, here's the thing, some of the coaching changes they made this year, they lose their 2 young up-and-coming defensive coaches. Inside linebackers coach Aaron Curry goes to the Jets, go under Aaron Glunt's staff. Still haven't filled that. They're interviewing guys right now this week. We'll kind of see who they end up filling it with. But they did lose. They moved on from Grady Brown, who interviewed for the Falcons defensive coordinator job. He's gone. There was a question, would he be promoted? Would he be back? No, he's not going to return to this team. So really interesting move there. They did hire Gerald Alexander, who was the assistant defensive backs coach from 2022 to 2023. He was the Raiders safeties coach last year. And then before that, he was also the defensive backs coach with the Dolphins under Brian Flores. So there's a lot of really good, lush background there for Gerald Alexander. You have the Flores background, worked under Tomlin for 2 years, and then worked with Patrick Graham and Antonio Pierce last year. So honestly, really good defensive background for Alexander. And you look at his group last year, was not the problem with the Raiders defense. Trayvon Merrick had probably the best season of his career, a former big-time pick for the Raiders. They lost their other starting safety, Marcus Epps, to a torn ACL very early on. Isaiah Polamalu, who was Troy Polamalu's nephew, ended up actually playing very well. And so what I'm trying to say is Alexander did a really good job with his safeties last year. So this looks like a pretty good coach. I don't love moving on from two young up and comers. These two guys, Brown and Curry, very well could be future defensive coordinators in this league. And so I don't love moving on from that type of influence. Now, we'll see what they bring in. Alexander is tenured, just like some of these, Curry and Brown were inexperienced. This was Brown's first NFL job. This was Curry's first actual position coaching job. He had been an assistant under the Seahawks Pete Carroll regime before. But, Alexander's a little more tenured in terms of coaching experience. He has about 5 or 6 years of that. So I think they got a good coach. I'm just wondering why they're kind of losing other good coaches to bring in good coaches. It seems like a net swap of pretty, you're just kind of discharging it out. I would have liked to have seen Brown, who also kind of was the leader of this turnover culture, right? The big time turnovers that the Steelers get. He was the leader that he certainly, I think, executed that vision quite well. This team did force turnovers if they didn't do anything else. And so the Steelers, I'm interested to see how that kind of changes, where that kind of comes from, the new influence for the turnover culture. I would have liked to have seen them, and I still would like to see them at some point, kind of elevate some of these coaches. Like, why couldn't Grady Brown have been corners coach and pass game coordinator, and then you could have made Jared Alexander the safeties and nickels coach? Because Alexander is, first of all, a safeties and nickels focused defensive backs coach. Now, does this mean assistant secondary coach Anthony Midget is still here? Is there going to be another hire to kind of bring on an outside corners focused guy? I don't know. I guess we'll see. I'm just kind of throwing out there, what we have seen in these kind of mirroring things. So the Steelers staff is overturning in areas I just didn't think they needed to overturn. You could strengthen those groups, but you didn't need to, kind of replace them. And meanwhile, they're not making any changes on the offensive side of the ball. It's, I think we talked about how disappointing the defense was, but the offense certainly did not pull its weight late in the year either. Pat Meyer's going to be back. And if you're looking at defensive changes, Terrell Austin is going to be back. So it's just a bunch of what's going on. And I just don't think the Steelers have the same level, when we talk about Eagles, have the same level of coaching, right? Vic Fangio is one of the best defensive coordinators of all time for the Eagles. They plucked him right away from the Miami Dolphins. He comes in and acts his vision. He doesn't do anything crazy, right? He plays his cover 2 high shell. They drop 7. They rush 4. They don't do a ton of crazy stuff. They do a little bit of disguising. They didn't blitz once against Mahomes. So for everyone talking about, wow, the Steelers need to blitz more, I think it would be a good idea to, but you don't need to. You can rush 4 and still win. Here's the thing. You got to just mix up the looks. They moved people around on the front. They showed pressure and backed out. They ran stunts. They moved them around the front. They did all these different things. And they also just have great personnel. And so, if you're going to line up and just try and win like the Eagles did, man, you better have Eagles talent. The Steelers on defense, I mean, they can't just line up and play spot drop cover 3. Even the Eagles aren't doing that. They're playing cover 2 at least. They're keeping a lid on it. Meanwhile, the Steelers are out here playing, cover 3, some man coverage. There just needs to be more diversity in that scheme, more ingenuity. And yeah, they do need a little more talent. They need a little more defensive line talent. I think they need some secondary help, specifically in the slot and outside corner, and they can get both of those things done, certainly. And so when you're talking about Steelers' path, investment in the trenches, they're starting that on the offensive line. They need to continue that on the offensive line, and then they need to really start to kind of invest in this defensive line. That Eagles defensive line and offensive line, both of those 2 units are the lifeblood of this team. Don't tell you anything otherwise. They are. With how good the Eagles' offensive line is, with how dominant their defensive line is, how deep it is, that is exactly why they win so much. They dominate up front, and then they have great players around them. They have the Cooper DeJeans, the Quinyon Mitchells, the Darius Slays. They have the A.J. Browns and Devontae Smiths and the Saquon Barkleys, and then they have this cool, calm, collected guy, Jalen Hurts, doing it all. It's one of the more stacked teams I think I could think of in recent memory in terms of Super Bowl winners. They kind of don't have a weakness, but everything kind of revolves around what they do up front first and foremost, and the rest of it follows. And so that's what the Steelers need to, I think, follow. They need to make sure their coaching there is top-notch. They have, I think, a great defensive line coach in Carl Dunbar, whose contract is expiring after the season. We'll see kind of where that goes. I haven't heard yet if he's going to come back or not. I think the Steelers would like him back. So that's a big one if they can have him back. And then they need to kind of find Jeff Stoutland, the Eagles offensive line coach, one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL. Look what he's done with Jordan Mailata, who was a 7th-round pick. He's just turned these guys into really high-level players. And so coaching is a big part of developing your talent. The Eagles are great at developing it and acquiring it. And I think the other thing is, John, look at the avenues of which they have acquired their talent. It's not just through the draft. Now, they drafted very well, obviously, but they've made some big-time moves as well, signing Saquon Barkley, trading for A.J. Brown. They signed Zach Bond off the scrap heap and turned him into a first-team All-Pro. I mean, he was an edge rusher that they turned into an off-ball linebacker, and he becomes a first-team All-Pro. That's great coaching. Mekhi Becton, who they signed late in the free agency process, becomes a quality starting guard after being a tackle. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, 1-year deal, high-level player. Darius Slay, trade. They just have made moves across their team that is not perfectly just through the draft. Did they build through the draft? Yes. They have great stars. Hurts is through the draft. A lot of their offensive line is through the draft. Devontae Smith, their wide receiver 2, who is probably could be a 1, is through the draft. Their defensive line is mostly through the draft. And they have other stars. Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean both through the draft. But you look at how they have also added players. It's also been through quality trades. It's been through quality free agent signings. The Steelers need more Deshaun Elliott signings. That's what they need, right? That was a 2-year, $6 million deal. And Deshaun Elliott played, in my opinion, at a Pro Bowl level last year. That was a great signing for the Steelers. They need to find things on the margins that showcase that. They can find guys that really pop in free agency. I think that's been the biggest blemish so far on Omar Khan's resume. He's had some inconsistent hits in free agency and trades right now, and so we'll see what they can do. But Steelers and Eagles, they have the similar visions, but they're still pretty far apart right now.
Great way to sort of summarize that. And I'm just thinking back to when we got pummeled out of the postseason, one and done, and we were talking about coaching changes and we were promised coaching changes. I just think some of these have been head scratchers, and the difference in approaches between the Eagles and the Steelers, I think, can be summed up by, like you said, Vic Fangio. By any measure, one of the best. They go out and get him, and meanwhile, Terrell Austin giving up, 500 yards in games to opponents in a couple of games this year. And he gets a pass to 2025. I think that really sums it up. The other parallel that, to me, I find interesting is, MVP Jalen Hurts is really helping Justin Fields' stock, not only in Pittsburgh. There were rumors that he's going to have a decent market, as a free agent, so it's not a foregone conclusion that the Steelers can just play Wilson off of Fields and pick one or the other. That is not he could have some significant options. What do you make of the comparison between Jalen Hurts and Justin Fields, that they're almost the same game, that the Eagles designed their offense around Hurts, and that's why it works? The team like the Steelers could get the same type of production out of Fields if they would just commit to surrounding him with the offense that would get the most out of him.
Well, Jalen Hurts has been a multi-year development program, if you will. He's been surrounded by a ton of talent, and what they have done with making this run game so dominant, making the trenches so dominant, is they have given Jalen Hurts the perfect ecosystem to develop. I think that's been the big thing, right? He really hasn't had to carry a lot of burden on his shoulders over the last few years. And when he has, sometimes he's faltered. This year, he rose to the occasion. Why? He continued to develop. Jalen Hurts took a step up from last year to this year. He continues to get better because he's in a great environment. This is similar to what has happened with a few quarterbacks. Brock Purdy is in a similar environment where, first you kind of baby him a little bit. The further along they get, though, that baby doesn't need to happen. I think you could see the same thing happening with Bo Nix right now in Denver, where you're seeing a guy kind of come out of his shell a little bit. And they're maybe prospects that weren't thought of as highly as, top picks like Jaden Daniels, for example, or Joe Burrow. But they have been put in perfect scenarios where they can develop their game while playing to their strengths. I think, that's the great thing about Jalen Hurts in the Eagles right now is they have surrounded him with such good, first of all, coaching. I think coaching has been a big part of this. I think, two, playing with that offensive line, playing with Saquon Barkley, playing with these receivers. He's had A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, Devontae Smith. He's had a lot of talent at wide receiver and tight end. He is able to kind of, sit back there and see what's going to happen. And, when they have asked him now, this year to step up, he's answered that bell. I think Fields, if you're going to go with the Fields-Hurts comparison, you have to put that into context. So the only way Hurts gets to where, Fields gets to where Hurts is really if you surround him with the talent, because Fields has been a slow processor. He's been a guy that has been a little trigger shy, but this is a lot of what Jalen Hurts struggled with early in his career. The difference is Jalen Hurts had been in that environment since the beginning of his career. Justin Fields has turned over play caller after play caller after play caller after play caller. That guy needs some stability in his game, in his career. So I think, if he's brought back, I would not expect Jalen Hurts level production. I think Jalen Hurts has steadily improved because he's in a great environment. But if the Steelers can surround Fields with a solid environment, you could see growth from Fields. I do think there's still some meat left on that bone, even though, it's his 5th, 6th year in the league now. But the Hurts-Fields comparisons don't hold a ton of weight just because their early careers have been so different. If Jalen Hurts had gone to the Bears and Justin Fields had gone to the Eagles, could they have swapped careers? Absolutely. I don't think there's any question that could have happened. But where you land in this league matters a heck of a lot. And where you have late career renaissances, where you have the Geno Smith renaissance, where you have the Baker Mayfield renaissance, when you have a Sam Darnold renaissance, these things happen when you put yourself into good spots, into solid areas where you can make a leap. And even if you consider Smith, Mayfield, and Darnold still somewhat flawed quarterbacks, I think they are. And personally, I think Hurts is better than all three of those players. But when you look at those guys went to really high-level coaching staffs. Darnold went to Kevin O'Connell and the Minnesota Vikings. Mayfield went to Liam Cohen and Dave Canales with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Both are now head coaches. And what Geno Smith was surrounded by was a veteran coaching staff that kind of knew what they were doing. He sat behind Russell Wilson for a year or two and kind of got to be able to really take that leap. And so when you're talking about late career renaissances, it's all linked to coaching and surrounding environment. And that's really what Fields needs. I don't think it's too late for Fields to be one of those guys that comes out and has a career renaissance. You just got to surround him with the best talent and the coaching. And obviously, the Steelers haven't made a ton of offensive coaching changes. And so I'm not sure I believe that this is the staff to do that. But that's all context you have to put into consideration when you're talking about Hurts versus Fields is how did Hurts get here? How have other guys with Fields' profile now gotten to where they are? All these things come together.
I think that's a great way to put it in context. The journey that Fields has taken to get here and the really disjointed career that Fields has had. I believe he said he's going to, if he would leave the Steelers, it would be his 3rd or 4th offense that he'd have to learn, playbook he'd have to learn. So yeah, it's basically bringing Fields back is not going to make him Jalen Hurts in 2025. I think we need to realize that. But I'll tell you, what's your sense in how much his stock is going up, however? And is it a lock if the Steelers want him back, he comes back? I mean, what's your sense of his market, Fields?
Well, I think he's going to have a really good market. He's the only guy, I think, on the market right now with the level of upside he has. He's the kind of Darnold profile of this class. I guess you could talk yourself into Zach Wilson or Trey Lance, but they are more dart throwers than anything. He is the one guy that kind of has that upside, right? He's still only 25 years old. He's a highly talented player with physical abilities. And those have been the guys that have kind of hit out of nowhere. So he's going to have a strong market. For teams that don't really have a clear direction at quarterback, the Jets, who are moving on from Aaron Rodgers, I do think that's a landing spot potentially. If you're disillusioned with this quarterback class, if you don't like Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders, if you're the Titans, I think you make a run at him. If I were a team that had an aging quarterback and needed a guy in a year or two, the Los Angeles Rams, I think that would be a perfect landing spot for Justin Fields. The Los Angeles Rams would be very interesting to me if I were him, even though I wouldn't start over Matt Stafford. Stafford's got maybe 1 or 2 years left probably in his career, or at least with the Rams, and then you could step in under Sean McVay and potentially really pop. I think that would be a really interesting area for him. But I also think the Steelers are really attractive for the same reasons we talked about. He would get actually some stability in his coaching for once. He wouldn't have to learn a new playbook. He could just focus on learning, changing mechanics, fixing his own weaknesses instead of picking up all new verbiage, learning new teammates, the overturn that he experienced in Chicago and then being traded was incredibly, I think, jarring for a young quarterback. You just don't see a lot of quarterbacks experience change that are young like that, and they end up great. There are some definite outliers there, that guys that are just different. But you look at the top quarterbacks in the NFL, and they had stability. I mean, look, Lamar Jackson had Greg Roman for a number of years. Joe Burrows had Zach Taylor for a number of years. Justin Herbert again. There was a good bit of stability there with Herbert, even though he came in right away and kind of cooked. Trevor Lawrence is, I think, a great example of what I'm talking about here. Is, this guy was a first-round pick, thought to be one of the best prospects you would see in recent memory, and he's just been a roller coaster. Why? Because the coaching in Jacksonville has been a clown show and has not been able to kind of give him the stability you need. So he's fallen into bad habits, and the coaching hasn't been great. And so I think Justin Fields needs some stability in that regard. But he's going to have a lush market. We'll see. The Steelers are going to have to entice him to sign that dotted line before this legal tampering period. Now, the legal tampering period is just under a month. I think a month from yesterday is when that starts. That's when teams can start to actually openly talk with other players that are going to be free agents to start the new league year, which is on March 12th this year. That's just about 2 weeks after the NFL Combine. Now, I do believe from what I've heard, the Steelers want to have this quarterback situation done before the legal tampering period. They want to know what their cap space is going to be in free agency, because they're going to want to make moves at receiver, D-line, corner, etc. So they want to know how much room they have, and they just don't want to go to the Wild West, right? They don't want to have Russell Wilson and Justin Fields both be free agents. Then you have these teams coming in and either ramping up the price, or you lose, God forbid you lose both of them, and you don't. What's the plan C? What's the plan D? I'm sure the Steelers aren't going to close the door on any possibility, but I think they want these two back. They want some level of quarterback stability. I do think they're leaning Fields right now. And so Fields is interesting. He's going to have a strong market. He's going to have enticing offers. It's just going to be, what do the Steelers pay him? And kind of what is the motivation for Justin Fields? I think from what I've heard, it is going to be a starting spot, and it's going to be some stability. The Steelers can offer both of those things. I think, signs would point towards Fields returning to the Steelers if they give him an offer worth his while.
And when you say entice, basically guaranteeing that he would be the starter.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can look and say, okay, we're going to go Justin Fields and then sign someone, have them compete fully out, and just 100% convince Fields to come back, unless you just massively overpay him, I suppose. But I do think you're going to have to give some guarantee of him having the inside track to the starting job for him to sign the dotted line before the open market. He could hit the open market, and the market might not be as plentiful as he thought, or maybe he won't get a guaranteed starting spot somewhere else. That's possible. Even if he goes to the Jets, for example, Tyrod Taylor is going to be there, so maybe he'll have to compete with him. And, Titans, Will Levis, those spots, even though I think are very open, are not necessarily walk in and boom, you're the starter 100%. The Steelers, I think, have the ability to give him that because they don't have anybody under contract except Skylar Thompson. And so I think even if the Steelers do bring in a veteran quarterback, which I think they probably will, I think they'll probably bring in another veteran or a young guy, depends. But I do think that they are going to give whoever they sign, whether it's Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, or we have a Wild West scenario where they go out and sign someone else, I do think they are going to look at the situation and try and give that person the inside track. So, yeah, I think if Justin Fields returns, he will definitely have been giving some assurance that he will be the starting quarterback in 2025.
And definitely between now and March 10th or even the 12th is going to be when we're going to see the rubber hit the road on these negotiations. We should see a signing before March 12th is what you're thinking.
I am thinking that. I am thinking by the time the Combine rolls around, we're going to hear buzz out of that week because all the agents are there, team personnel's there. So that's oftentimes when teams really start getting into the nitty-gritty of contract negotiations with these agents and sometimes players. So I believe we are going to start really hearing movement. We'll hear from Omar Khan that week as well, kind of where that's going. I don't think it's going to happen the week of the Combine, but the week after that, which is between the Combine and that legal tampering period for free agency, I think that is exactly when we probably hear something about the quarterback situation. We'll hear some clarity, I think, around that. So, yes, I do think that we will probably know before March 12th when officially free agency starts. The legal tampering period, I think, is that Monday, the 10th. so you can agree to contracts with guys then as well. So maybe even before then, I think. So that week, keep an eye out for it. After the combine, between the start of free agency, I think is when we find out a lot of finality on this quarterback situation, one or the other, or someone else completely.
All right, the dominoes will start to fall in the Ides of March there. But all of the looking at the Eagles and knowing that the Steelers do have a plan to try to emulate what they've built. How far away are the Steelers to, you know what I mean, when you look at just the domination that the Eagles did, and the way that they sort of kind of shocked the world, I think, with what they did with the Chiefs and Chiefs looking for that three-peat and all that hype that they had coming in. I mean, the standard is the Eagles. It's they have now set the standard, and the Steelers are desperately trying to get their chin above the bar, and where are they in that climb?
Yeah, I think the Steelers are kind of. I mean, they're on the outside in right now still. Look at what they need. I mean, they still need a lot of talent for things to really pop. When you look at what they need, I mean, this team definitely still needs defensive linemen. They need wide receivers and corner. The biggest thing they need a quarterback. I mean, the O-line still has to gel. The Steelers are not that close to being where the Eagles are. The Eagles are one of the more dominant teams. Really, it is. You look at them top to bottom, and they have a great roster. It's really hard to poke holes in that roster. And the Steelers just do not have the same level of depth. And so, can the Steelers maybe win a playoff game with a great offseason? I think they can. We'll see. They have to make changes on, the actual coaching that is going to be there has to look in the mirror and make changes themselves. Mike Tomlin first and foremost in that discussion, but they're not that close to a Super Bowl. I think that, they can get to playoff wins in the right scenario. I just don't think they are all that close. They're far away from where the Eagles are, man. The Eagles are a top to bottom juggernaut. The Chiefs, I don't even think are an elite roster. I just think they have Patrick Mahomes. And I think when you're in the AFC, if you're going to win without a franchise quarterback, man, you better be able to make the margins up outside of the quarterback position, right? If you're not going to have Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, etc., you have to have the rest of the team to work with it. And so the Steelers, in order to win a playoff game, are going to either have to, one, pray that they don't run into one of those two, one of those five guys, or they're going to have to really build up this roster around them. And so, going through the AFC is not easy. You deal with heavyweight quarterbacks that you don't really in the NFC. The NFC, if the Steelers were in the NFC, they'd have a much easier path to winning playoff game. Just not the amount of elite quarterbacks in that conference. In the AFC, you face elite quarterback for elite quarterback for elite quarterback. I mean, if the Steelers had beaten the Ravens, they would have gone, I believe it would have been Baltimore, so they would have faced Lamar Jackson. And they would have had the ability to face Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen in 3 straight games. I mean, if you're going to the Super Bowl, you are going to have to beat 2 or 3 of those names. Plus Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert's still in the conference. The conference is just loaded with quarterback talent. And so the Steelers are going to need to make it up in the margins. So they need to build up this defense. I think that is the one way where they can even it up a little bit. If the Steelers have a dominant defense, how it was supposed to be this year, I think that's an easy way to do it. And then they just need more playmakers and a better offensive line. I mean, that's simple as that. They have better receivers. They probably need a breakaway back that can get them explosive runs if they're going to be a run-first team. But the offensive line needs to gel. And so both sides of the ball need significant changes and changes of trajectory to get there. They can scrape their way by to 9-8 and 10-7, et cetera, get to the wild card round. But if they want to make a serious run at this thing, they need to make up the margins a lot in other areas.
How it was supposed to be. That's the way you put it in terms of that supposedly dominant Steelers D that never really materialized. And we saw a dominant D put on by the Eagles, and it kind of shows that, well, maybe defense still can win championships, but they certainly didn't overpay for their defense the way the Steelers have done for our defense. You know what I mean? They just had a defense that was high in the stats in pretty much every conceivable category, not high in the payroll like the Steelers did. How did they? Well, you kind of talked about how they pieced it together through consistent picks on the D line, but also some of those nifty free agency signings. But they did so without breaking the bank on the defensive side of the football. Right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, Zach Ballin was not a super expensive free agency signing. I mean, he wasn't. He signed for $3.5 million, and he's a first-team All-Pro. You signed Mekhi Becton, who was one of your starting offensive linemen, for, I think it was $2.75 million. I don't even think it was that much money at all. It was a one-year deal. They signed him in April, right after the NFL draft. And so that is just good GMing. They spent first-round picks on premium positions. And then they paid Saquon Barkley. They were on the cutting edge of this thing. People have been talking about, the devaluation of running backs. And then this offseason, they were the first team to go out and give a free agent running back a big contract. They gave Saquon Barkley $12 million. He becomes the offensive player of the year. You look at this and you just look at the margins. They saw ahead of a trend, right? The running back position becoming a little bit more valuable now because the running game is kind of swinging back a little bit with these two high coverages. So they pay Saquon. He becomes a big engine for them offensively. You look at their signings on the defensive side of the ball. C.J. Gardner-Johnson was not a heralded signing at all. He was forced out of Detroit. And meanwhile, he comes to Philly and is just a winning player. A really solid nickel and safety for them. I don't believe he cost them that much either. Yeah, he cost them, I believe, a 3-year, $27 million contract. It's $9 million a year. I mean, that's not breaking the bank for a solid football player. And so you look at all of this and you're like, well, the Steelers need to make similar things happen, right? You look at the Steelers' moves. Deshaun Elliott, great signing. Elandon Roberts, great signing. They need those types of signings. They need the Elandon Roberts, the Deshaun Elliott types of signings, because those made so much hay for them on defense. E-Rob was a great player for them, a great run stopper. Deshaun Elliott, same way. But you look at, Dante Jackson. He was fine, 5 picks, but definitely showed down the stretch, that he wasn't the panacea of this group, if you will. Larry Ogunjobi, that contract turning out to not be a great contract, to be quite honest with you. The receiver position, right, throwing all your eggs in the one basket to get Brandon Ayuk and then busting out instead of, getting someone, making sure you have a backup plan. I think that came back to hurt them. And so you just look at some of the signings they had made, and it just hasn't worked out.
Did we overpay for Patrick Queen? You didn't mention him.
Yeah, right. I mean, Patrick Queen is an interesting player that I don't think was being used to his strengths. And I think that's another thing. I don't think he had a great season. I also think he's a downhill. He's a great blitzer. He's great in space. I'm not sure he's a great green dot guy. That was one of the big things in Baltimore. They took the green dot off and gave it to Roquan Smith, and all of a sudden he flourished. Next year you decide to give that to Peyton Wilson. I don't know. We'll see. But, there's a lot of things there. Patrick Queen, you signed this first team All-Pro that was used in a very specific way in Baltimore, and then you change his role completely. And it's not the correct evaluation. It's not the same way the Eagles did Zach Bond, who was an edge rusher, and Vic Fangio went and said, hey, I think this guy could be an off-ball linebacker, and he becomes a first-team All-Pro. So you got to play to their strengths, right? You got their specific roles that these guys fill. And so when we talk about coaching to strengths, this is a big part of it. Is there a good vision alignment between management and coaching staff? That's another thing. When you are vertically building a team, Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni better have the right look, right? They better know what they're doing. Okay, if we're going to sign Zach Bond, we know he's going to be an inside linebacker. He's not going to be an edge rusher. Cool. If the Steelers signed Patrick Queen and Omar Khan and Andy Weidel maybe had signed him in line with this, they're going to blitz. They're going to be a downhill team. He's going to be a great coverage linebacker too, but we saw what he did in Mike Macdonald's scheme, which was a blitz-heavy scheme. He's a menace coming downhill, and then you don't blitz at all and don't really put him downhill and have him redirect as the green dot guy. You just kind of understand where these things kind of fall. I look at the musical chairs they play on the offensive line last year before Fautanu got hurt, rotating right tackles. I mean, why? It's just things like this. Going into the season with Van Jefferson as your wide receiver too. I mean, that is not a serious winning move. And so the Steelers just have, if you're comparing them to the Eagles, look at the margins the Eagles win on. They win on personnel management. They put them in great positions, even if other teams didn't see that in that player. They make signings that sometimes aren't huge splashes, and they attack positions relentlessly. We talk the reason the Eagles. There were three reasons the Eagles went from a pretty mediocre team last year to Super Bowl champs this year. One, they fired both coordinators and moved on, and they got Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore is now the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. Vic Fangio is one of the best defensive coordinators of all time. That not only saved Nick Sirianni's job, but got him a ring. Two, their secondary was an absolutely atrocious mess. So what do? Okay, they signed C.J. Gardner-Johnson. They draft Quinyon Mitchell. They draft Cooper DeJean. Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell both make the all-rookie team. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, a very good safety nickel type for them. That's three players they added to one position group that completely turned it over. It became one of the best secondaries in the NFL. The other thing that was okay but not as great, they were trying to be that running team. They had a great O-line. They had Jalen Hurts, but they weren't an explosive, efficient rushing attack the year before. So what do? They signed Mekhi Becton. They signed Saquon Barkley. They become an explosive, efficient rushing attack. I mean, they attacked three of their biggest needs and turned it over completely. So you can see how they did that. So the Steelers this year, if you're looking at their equivalents, if you think their coordinators aren't, up to snuff like I think they aren't, well, they're keeping both of those coordinators. So if you're going to do that, well, you better change, right? So I better be talking about this in November and saying, Arthur Smith did this and he changed this. And Mike Tomlin, because this is Mike Tomlin's defense, first and foremost. Mike Tomlin did this and saw that he was going to change this on the defensive side of the ball. Okay, that could be a way to it. Nick Sirianni probably changed things behind the scenes. I'm sure he was. He's more of a CEO type than Mike Tomlin is. Mike Tomlin is involved in the defense and is the CEO type at the same time. But he changed things, I'm certain. So failure's got to turn into change, right? So that's a big part of that. Okay, the Steelers definitely need cornerback help, right? Well, they better add 2 corners this year in the slot and outside. That's going to have to be a big part of that. And so everything just kind of comes together. How can you make the margins win? Can you find a slot corner for $4 million a year? Sure, you can in this class. I love the idea that Alex Kozora of Steelers Depot threw out earlier this week to sign Nate Hobbs from the Las Vegas Raiders, one of the most underrated nickel players in the NFL. What's he probably going to get a year? $5 million? And you would have a massive boost in the slot with him. Jared Alexander coached him. It's a natural fit. It makes sense. And that's not going to be a break-the-bank signing. We all talk about adding premium talent on the offensive side of the ball. The Steelers need a premium talent, right? The Eagles at one point added A.J. Brown, and they were willing to trade draft capital to get him. Well, recently we've heard rumors. Who's out there? Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, Devontae Adams probably going to be leaving New York. Now with Aaron Rodgers out, well, you better land a premium wide receiver to pair with George Pickens, right? I mean, these are things that we're talking about. So you need premium players as well, because the Eagles have added premium players through trades. A.J. Brown and Darius Slay. They signed Saquon Barkley. They add another premium player, right? So the Steelers better be looking at where they can win on the margins in certain areas, but they also need just those premium talents. And so all these things come together, and that's how you win on the margins. You have kind of a risk and reward scale, and you look at where it all fits together. And so the Steelers have opportunities this year to massively upgrade the team. They will, if they can get another legitimate wide receiver, I think that would go a long way to helping this offense. If they can get this O-line starting to move in the right direction, right, that's a big part of it. All these things come together, and there's a lot of things the Eagles do well, but they evaluate talent, they develop it, and the fit is what makes it work. The front office and the coaching staff have the right vision for these players, and it's all aligned. And so that's what the Steelers need to really look at and say, how can we get these players into a good spot? Because that defense has a lot of talent. That was the idea with signing Patrick Queen, right? They were signing a first-team All-Pro. They were signing a premium talent at a position that they have had so much trouble with since Ryan Shazier went down. He was supposed to be the big signing. Then they changed his role completely. He looks out of place a little bit. All right, course correct. It's time, right? That guy can be a great player. I've seen him do it before. And so I think that's going to be a big part of all this is how do they maximize their defensive talent? And then how do they kind of supplement that? And more importantly, how do they build up the talent on the offensive side of the ball because they clearly need just more talent infusion there. Even though I think the offensive coaching hasn't been great, clearly they just need more talent offense.
So much to do with the Steelers to climb the championship mountain summited by the Eagles, who are the blueprint for what the Steelers will try to do. But I'm going to close with this. As we speak in Pittsburgh, there's a black and gold billboard calling for Art Rooney II to sell the team because the Steelers standard has descended to mediocrity. In other words, there's a lot of people in the 412 area code who do not think that the Steelers organization in its current form is up to the task of achieving another Lombardi trophy for this once storied franchise. But we're going to continue the rebuilding process all through the offseason. Nick is going to be at the combine. We're going to be picking his brain all through free agency. So stay with us as we go on this long journey that we saw that the Eagles reached the pinnacle of pro football. Until then, let's get some work done, Steelers.